Hi, this is Anna, and we are now going to look at that uterine cycle. Also, this is what you would think of as your menstrual cycle, all right, going along with Unit 14. All right, so when we're talking about the uterine wall, you need to know the different parts. So the naming is very similar to what we do with the muscles or any of these other things. The nervous system, it's a very similar nomenclature. So you've got the metrium, which is going to be the layers, okay? Peri means outer or the outside, around. So the perimetrium is going to be the serosa, the serous membrane of the uterine wall. And then myo means muscle, so myometrium is going to be the smooth muscle. You've got 3 layers. It is extraordinarily powerful, okay? Muscles in here, it's insanely strong, okay? And then endo means inside. So this is the innermost lining, okay? And this is actually divided into 2 layers, the functional layer and the basal layer. The basal layer is deep, it regenerates. This is the layer that goes through mitosis to regenerate the strata. The functionalis is what nourishes and holds a developing embryo or fetus, and it's what gets sloughed off and rebuilt each cycle, okay? So this is a mucosa. All right, so you're going to have a layer of epithelium and a layer of connective tissue, okay? So this is primarily simple columnar epithelium down in that basalis layer, but it's going to have a bunch of glands embedded in it, blood vessels, and all of that good stuff. The lamina propria is primarily a relar CTP, but you've got some areas of reticular, which is important because you need to basically monitor this area for pathogens because it is an entry point for pathogens to get into the body because, you know, penises. And there are also, and because of that, there's a lot of white blood cells. Okay, next slide. All right, so here we're looking at a histology slide of the uterus. And I'd like you to be able to identify it, okay? And then I'd like you to basically know the structures. So you can see the simple columnar epithelium of the mucosa. You can see the lamina propria here, and you can see lots of different little glands in here. Now, this is the endometrium right here, where you've got epithelium and you've got glands. Where you don't have epithelium and glands, you have the myometrium, okay? All right, next slide. All right, one of the things you're going to do is you're going to memorize the basic cycle, all right, the uterine cycle. Now, remember, it is an average of 28 days, which means it's really going to be 24 to 33 days long, depending on who you are. Okay, that's kind of like an average range. It can actually be longer or shorter. Okay, if you have a 28-day cycle, that means you most likely ovulated on day 14. Okay, just please remember that this is an average, all right? And this is why the rhythm method doesn't work, is because if you just use the rhythm method, you're assuming ovulation is on day 14. But if you have a shorter cycle, it could be on day 10. And if you have a longer cycle, it could be on day 18 or 19, okay? So you actually have to look at the signs of the body to use the uterine cycle to predict ovulation. You can't just use the rhythm method, which is based on this 28-day cycle, okay? Day 1 through 5, if you have an average cycle, that means this is going to be, if you have an average cycle that's 28 days long, then the menses is going to be from day 1 to 5, all right? So when you go to the doctor, if you're a female, they ask you when was the first day of your last period, and then you whip out your phone or your calendar and you look it up because you can't remember, okay? So we count the cycle based on when you began menses. And that is because this corresponds to the FSH being released with the ovarian cycle to push those primary follicles into development, okay? So during this, the endometrium, the functional layer is being sloughed off along with anything else that's in there. It's not as much blood as you think. It's 1/4 to 1/2 a cup. Okay, what stops it is the estrogen from those primary follicles transitioning into the secondary follicles. Okay, so estrogen turns off menstruation. Now, once menstruation stops, you are now going to go into the next phase of the uterine cycle, which is the proliferative stage, days 6 through 14, okay? And this is being driven by estrogen. Menses is being driven by low hormones, okay? Proliferative is being driven by estrogen. All of this is controlled by the ovarian cycle, all right? Because the menstrual cycle or the uterine cycle is more visible, we tend to think of that first, but the uterine cycle is completely secondary to the ovarian cycle. Okay, the proliferative stage is going to end when you ovulate, and that Graafian follicle converts to a corpus luteum, and once it does that, you go into the next stage. Let's look at that, right? That next stage is the secretory stage, and this corresponds to the luteal phase of the ovarian cycle, okay? Okay? This is being driven by progesterone, okay? Lots and lots of progesterone. That progesterone prevents any more follicles from erupting. It also causes the endometrium to thicken up. It tells the endometrial glands to start secreting nutrients. And this is important because in a few days, if fertilization occurs, a blastocyst is going to drop into the uterus. And it needs nutrients for a couple of days, and then it's going to embed into the endometrium, okay? Now, if this fertilization has occurred and you've got a blastocyst, okay, this blastocyst is going to be secreting human chorionic gonadotropin, okay, HCG. That's going to tell the corpus luteum to keep going, okay? And actually, let's just think of this as a blastocyst at this point, okay? If fertilization doesn't happen, then the luteinizing hormone and the progesterone levels are dropping, the corpus luteum collapses, and menstruation will begin, okay? So what actually stimulates menstruation? That crash in hormones causes the blood vessels to spasm and kink. When they do that, no blood goes through, which means all of that tissue is deprived of oxygen and the cells die, okay? Then the blood vessels relax, blood flushes in really, really fast, kind of like a fire hose, and it breaks off that functional layer, okay? So cramping is going to be partially the spasming of these blood vessels, but then also the uterus muscles will contract periodically to help kind of squeeze that stuff out. Okay, next slide. All right, let's look at how these things are overlapping, okay? So at the top, actually let me make this a little bit smaller. We've got the hormones, okay? So this is the ovarian cycle, okay? Down here, we're showing what is happening with the uterine cycle, okay? So day 1, okay, you're looking at the menses, all right, days 1 through 5, okay, right through here. And you will notice that estrogen is fairly low, progesterone is fairly low, okay? The one thing they're not showing really is FSH and LH, which are basically kind of doing this, and then they at about day 5, they go back down again, all right? And then right when ovulation occurs, at basically the same point you see this happening, those do this. And it's that LH that causes everything to dump and move it to the next phase. Okay, so let me erase this. We'll show that more on the next stage. Okay, so you're seeing that progesterones are really low. I really don't quite like the way they've done this a little bit. What I would represent is kind of like this, and then you would see just a slight rising of estrogen levels here. It's still fairly low, but it's going to do this kind of gradual up, okay? And what's happening here is you've got this proliferative stage right here, okay? This is the first half of that proliferative stage right here. And you can see the endometrium is beginning to build up. Now we're starting to get even more estrogen here, and you can see even more development here, Okay, now here is where you're going to switch from progesterone and estrogen. Now you'll see it's fairly, you got a little bit of development here, but where it really beefs up here and here, this is in response to the elevation in progesterone. And then what you'll see is this sudden crash, okay, right about here. Okay, it starts to go down and then it bottoms out. And this is showing you where the first day of your next cycle is occurring. Okay, all right, next slide. All right, I like this particular picture because it's showing you everything that's going on. Okay, so up here, you're seeing the ovarian cycle. Down here, you're seeing the uterine cycle. And it's nice because it shows you how these things go together. And I also like how this one shows the estrogen in a little bit more detail, so you can see that there is a slight elevation as you go through days 1 through 5. Okay, so what you can see is you've got your primary follicle here. FSH is up, LH is right there. Estrogen is starting to go up, progesterone is really bottomed out. Okay, and it's this FSH that's still fairly high that's going to help push this, and then the estrogen elevating is going to push this, okay? And then you'll see the FSH and the LH, they're not really being secreted at very high levels. In fact, the estrogen levels, because they've gone up, are causing the pituitary to store the FSH and LH, okay? Now, here you can see the first day, and here you can see day 5, and so you can see the menses are occurring. It's sloughing this stuff off. And then in response to the estrogen, it stops sloughing, and it's going to start doing the proliferation where it starts to build back up, okay? Now here, they're showing ovulation, okay? Now, the estrogen levels really soar, okay? That causes the LH, which is this green line, to dump all at once, and secondarily the FSH also dumps all at once. And you get this huge dump of hormones, and that causes this to pop. So that is going to occur at around day 14. So the LH going up is at about day 13. Ovulation would be at about day 14. Now you've got the secretory stage beginning here. Now you'll see that the estrogen is still fairly high. The progesterone is starting to go up a day after ovulation occurs. This is because you need a day for those follicular cells to switch from estrogen production to progesterone production in that Graafian follicle. Now, progesterone is going to go up. Progesterone is an antagonist to estrogen, so it's really going to bring that estrogen down. You still have estrogen being secreted, okay? But it's not going to have as much of an effect, which is good, because if you had too much estrogen, you might secrete another egg, which actually does happen sometimes. Sometimes someone will let an egg go a day or two after the other one. So you can actually have twins that are different ages by a few days. Okay. What am I talking about? Progesterone. The progesterone is the driving force now, and you can see all of the other hormones are fairly low. And that really causes this stuff to thicken up and start secreting stuff, the endometrial glands, and you've just got a really nice bed for the embryo or the blastocyst to implant in, okay? Now, here you can see the peak of progesterone was there, and then it's starting to go down, okay, because the corpus luteum here is doing regression because fertilization didn't occur, okay? And eventually, the progesterone and the estrogen crash, okay, right about there. And you can see FSH and LH begin to go up as estrogen and progesterone crash. This is day 1 of your next cycle, and menstruation starts. And in the ovarian cycle, that Graafian follicle has collapsed from the corpus luteum into the corpus albicans, okay? And now you have scar tissue. All right, next slide. All right, so I like to show this because I think it's very interesting. With y'all, y'all have probably heard of the rhythm method and how it's not accurate, and it's not accurate because it's based on this idea that all women have a 28-day cycle and they ovulate on day 14. And so it's not accurate, but there are actually a lot of signs in the human body that can be used pretty good for prediction of fertility. Okay, When you are not fertile, you do not want sperm and bacteria and viruses and fungi or whatever getting into the uterus. It's a pathogen protection. And so you plug that up, okay? And that plug makes your cervical mucus, cervical fluid, really dry and sticky. So this is basically the mucus plug, which you probably have heard about with women who are pregnant. Their mucus plug falls out, all right? But you do develop a mucus plug every month, okay? And this prevents junk from getting into your uterus, okay? When you are fertile or becoming fertile, you need that mucus plug to thin out. And this is going to be in response to estrogen, okay? The estrogen causes this mucus plug to become a river of flowing mucus, okay? This is very noticeable. It starts coming out. You can get it off your panties, and you can see they call this the egg white stage, and it is long and thin and stretchy. So when you're nearing ovulation, it starts to get creamy, and when you are very close to ovulation, it becomes this egg white stage, like a day or two before. And then it dries up pretty quickly once the progesterone levels go up. The other thing that's really fascinating about this is the structure of crystals in this fluid changes. So when you're not fertile, you get this sticky stuff, okay, where the proteins kind of all clump up, and this traps debris so that stuff can't go through it. When you are fertile, it actually causes this ferning pattern where you get this really nice pathway that actually helps sperm be drawn up through it. Okay, so here's another one. Now, what's really fascinating is this estrogen affects all mucousy or saliva or interstitial fluid. Basically, everything is affected by this in women. So this picture right here isn't from cervical mucus. It's actually from spit, okay, from saliva. You could get this in your synovial fluid. You can get it any of these fluids. And the estrogen causes this ferning pattern to occur. And it's really, really cool. And you can go to Walgreens and buy a kit that has these little microscope things on it, where you put your saliva, let it dry, and then you can see the ferning pattern to predict ovulation, okay? Anyway, that was the last of the slides for this particular portion of Unit 14. So I'm going to stop there, and you can go on to the next thing.